Hello, everyone. Manar Adli here, founder and director of Mint Press News. So, the Epstein files have been released by the DOJ. And while it is very much a controlled release of information, something that we have been reporting on for nearly a decade is the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein, the state of Israel, acting as a spy to blackmail US politicians and figures to bring Israeli intelligence closer to our establishment. Now, the latest release of Epstein files has once again revealed the sordid and disgusting realities of the global elite who rule over us. Epstein was the centerpiece of a massive financial, political, and sex trafficking empire spanning across the globe. And of course, if you've been following Mint Press News since our inception, we have been covering this for over a decade through our series of reporting with our journalist, Whitney Webb. Yet by 2019, the walls were closing in, and Epstein was eventually arrested and died shortly after in highly mysterious circumstances in a Manhattan prison. But even the circumstances around his death are now questionable. Epstein could count presidents and princes as among his closest associates. But our guest today has been digging through thousands of the files and revealed that one of his best friends was a rather unexpected figure, star anarchist, intellectual Noam Chomsky. Alan MacLeod is senior staff writer and podcast producer here at Mint Press News and has just released a 5,000-word investigation into the Chomsky-Epstein relationship. It's called the Chomsky-Epstein Files, unraveling a web of connections between a star leftist academic and a notorious pedophile. Alan, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be back with you.
So let's just start by running down the key points in all of this. What are the key facts you found based on digging through the nearly 4,000 recently released files that mention Noam Chomsky, our favorite leftist academic?
It's pretty shocking, Minar. I guess if I were to sum them up in bullet points, I would say right up until Epstein's arrest in 2019 for child sex trafficking, Chomsky was advising him on crisis management, sympathizing with, and I'm quoting his email directly here, the horrible way you're being treated in the press and public. So Chomsky was providing Epstein with counsel on how to best try and quash these rumors before they got out of hand. On multiple occasions, Chomsky expressed a desire to visit Little St. James Island, the Caribbean hideout of Epstein, where a lot of his worst crimes were committed. Chomsky flew on the Lolita Express jet. He stayed at Jeffrey Epstein's mansions in New York, including the one that everyone's seen pictures of, and in Paris. He regularly met him for dinner, invited him to his house, and all sorts of other social occasions as well. Chomsky met with a lot of Epstein's most notorious friends, including Steve Bannon, Woody Allen, and Ehud Barak. He considered Epstein to be among his closest friends, and he used terms like "dear friend" to describe Epstein. Epstein was probably Chomsky's closest advisor in terms of legal and financial advice, and he regularly exchanged gifts with Epstein as well. And finally, I would say that Chomsky's relationship with his children also broke apart, in part due to their protests over his insistence on appointing Jeffrey Epstein's right-hand man to be on the board of the Chomsky family's trust. So all in all, what come out of these 4,000 documents that have been released is an incredibly close relationship that few would have imagined given Chomsky's political leanings.
I mean, Noam Chomsky has been very well known for writing so many books on the nuclear arms race and political movements that have really identified with leftist ideology and movements. And so why do you think Chomsky was doing this? I mean, why was he spending so much time running around with the world's most notorious child sex trafficker?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is pretty extraordinary. Epstein came into Chomsky's life, and the two became great friends over the 2010s, that's for sure. Ultimately, Chomsky ended up becoming his semi-official crisis manager. And what I mean by that is the walls were really closing in the 2018 and 2019 for Jeffrey Epstein. The massive public outroar ended up with him being arrested in 2019 and then perhaps or perhaps not taking his own life in prison. This whole time, Chomsky was advising Epstein. Epstein was panicked and he was asking Noam for advice through the emails, saying, what do I do? The press is onto me, Congress, everyone. And Chomsky said that he said that it was absolutely outrageous how Epstein is being treated. He ultimately said it's probably better to just let the thing die down. Don't cause too much attention to this by putting your name out. Don't battle it. Just let the public interest in this die down, and hopefully the thing will blow over. He compared, he basically presented Jeffrey Epstein as this almost saintly figure who'd been torn apart by a vicious media, the gossip mongers, Chomsky called the media talking about it. He compared Epstein's accusers to Nazis and to religious zealots who were just baying for blood, and thought of him as the worst possible person. Chomsky had a very close relationship with Epstein. As I said, he ultimately became very close friends, especially he and his wife with Epstein. They had them over, the Epstein and whoever he was taking with him, for dinner at their house many times. Meanwhile, Epstein also opened doors for Chomsky, allowing him to fly and live in a sort of little world of luxury. He booked hotel rooms for Chomsky, suites in Manhattan hotels, for example, let him stay at his gigantic apartment in New York City, offered to take him to his Caribbean island. So ultimately, I guess Chomsky, why was he doing this? Because he ended up becoming very close friends with Epstein, and that's really what comes out in these emails. He talks about an everlasting friendship that's true and will always endure throughout time. That's an almost direct quote from what Chomsky was saying to Epstein. And right up until his dying day, Chomsky was defending Epstein vociferously from attacks in the press. So this whole thing has been very shocking to a lot of people who probably saw Chomsky as a sort of moral mountain, somebody to look up to. And yet this is going to be really, it's going to shake people's confidence in his work, his judgment, and his dealings for the last 40, 50 years.
I mean, I probably like you, Alan, I don't know about you, but I definitely was influenced by Noam Chomsky growing up. I mean, I read many of his books. One of my favorite books by Noam Chomsky is Failed States. But I did notice a shift in his foreign policy a little bit when it came to Syria and Afghanistan, and basically not advocating, but he showed that he really truly wasn't for anti-imperialism when it came to Syria. Like, those are like little things that I started to notice, but these are big things considering he poised himself to be like an anti-interventionist, and he would say like the United States is the biggest exporter of terrorism in the world. I remember him writing an op-ed in the New York Times while I was running Mint Press, like in the early days. And I felt so inspired, like he was speaking so courageously about US imperialism, and he called the United States the largest exporter of terrorism around the world. And the labeling of groups like Hezbollah or other resistance groups as terrorists is ironic considering the US funding regime change operations and bombing and just forever wars, the forever wars. And so I think something that really stuck out about these files are these accusations of satanic child sacrifices and rituals and cannibalism and the raping and even breeding of young children, including boys and girls. And I actually was following some of the mainstream coverage, and they're acknowledging that Epstein trafficked young children, but they keep saying the alleged cannibalism, or the absurd accusations of cannibalism, the absurd accusations of satanic rituals. So based on what you found, like, was Epstein involved in any of these crimes? And to what extent do we know that these allegations about satanic blood rituals and cannibalism and talking about children tasting like cream cheese. Like, how much of that is real? Like, do we know? And did Chomsky, was he involved in any of that kind of abuse?
Well, the second question is pretty easy to answer. Throughout the files, there's no indication that Chomsky was involved in any sort of child sexual abuse or even knew about it. Um, like you said, I mean, like you, Chomsky was a great influence on my political thinking. I must have read at least a dozen of his books, probably more. I did an entire PhD developing Chomsky's media theory. I've published a book called Propaganda in the Information Age, Still Manufacturing Consent, which updates the book Manufacturing Consent, which was written in the 80s, which describes how the modern media really function. So certainly I am, a long-time scholar of Chomsky. And as I said, there's nothing in the emails that says that Chomsky was participating in any sort of child rape or any sort of sexual activities at all. So let's make that clear. However, Epstein was convicted in 2008 for heinous crimes, trafficking, solicitation of prostitution from a minor, etc., etc. And there had been literally dozens of accusers, including Virginia Giuffre, coming forward, telling their story about what Epstein was doing. And so even by 2017, 2018, the whole world knew what Jeffrey Epstein was, and yet Chomsky chose to get closer and closer to him, to the point where, as I said in the article, that Epstein was among his closest friends and most trusted advisors. So even if Chomsky wasn't involved in this, and I don't think he was still actively deciding to spend some of his last years on Earth passionately defending one of the world's most notorious sexual predators and most sordid monsters. And that, for me, is astonishing to find out. The amount of stuff that has come out in the last few weeks from these Epstein files is staggering. Millions of documents have been released, all of which have been gone through with a fine-tooth comb from Trump's DOJ and FBI to make sure they've been cleansed of a lot of information. A lot of people's names have been blanked out. A lot of the people that Epstein was emailing are not there. There's no mention of Donald Trump in them, which is very suspicious, frankly, given their close relationship. And what comes out of all the things that are being revealed right now is that Epstein was really the fulcrum, the centerpiece of an entire global billionaire political economic network that really revolved around personal relationships. And Epstein was really, he was the centerpiece of that, connecting countries like Israel, Qatar, the United Kingdom, and the United States together with some of the biggest business empires in the world. And so many of the things that have been rumored about what Epstein has been up to, well, there is, as you said, there is some evidence to suggest that Epstein was not only trafficking and raping girls, but also killing them, also participating in all sorts of crazy, almost unimaginable rituals. I'm sure in time more and more will come out from that, but right now we'll stick to the facts, and the facts are bad enough. It is extraordinary, the sort of information that's coming out, and I don't doubt that any future Epstein files drop is going to, again, pull together so many strings of so many different stories that have been bubbling over the last 15 or 20 years to show that he really was one of the most important and influential figures in all of world politics.
Absolutely. And a lot of the things about the satanic rituals and cannibalism were part of testimonies. And obviously, a lot of these things can't be verified. So we will never really truly know. But I'll tell you, when I read a lot of these things, I mean, I was ready to crash out. I mean, it was so overwhelmingly disturbing that part of the reason I wasn't even able to report on what was coming out of these Epstein files for the first 3-4 days is because it was too much to digest and process, and to be able to figure out what was real and what was not, and how do we even verify these things. And just the thought that we live in some sort of illusion, we think that we have this
Yeah.
stable world, but like we really are ruled by a group of pedophiles and elite. So yeah, it's been a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just want to say that the more and more files that come out, the accusers, the survivors, and the victims of Epstein, they become more and more vindicated by the day. Their stories become more and more corroborated with more evidence coming out. So I frankly don't put anything past Jeffrey Epstein about what he was doing in these sorts of things. And what really strikes me with all of this is that, you know, it goes to just underline the fact that there is no ethical way to be a billionaire. It literally having that much money and power destroys your brain, destroys your morality, to the point where it's clear from these files that Epstein and others considered themselves completely above the law and held no sort of value for any sort of value for human life. And that's what really comes out of these things, that the billionaire class that rules us has to be destroyed and overthrown.
Absolutely. And it's disturbing stuff. But you also found out that Noam Chomsky flew on the Lolita Express. I mean, that was Epstein's infamous private jet where he and his guests would abuse women and girls. So, what was Chomsky doing on this plane?
Well, you know, one of his very last interviews that he gave before he became incapacitated in 2023 from a massive stroke was with the Wall Street Journal. And already there were rumors circulating about Chomsky. And they asked him directly, had you ever flown on this Lolita Express? And he cast doubt on that, saying, no, but if I did, it was only a 30-minute flight. And, you know, what does that prove? And this 30-minute flight did actually happen. There's now pictorial evidence of that. And we know that Chomsky and Epstein flew together from Boston to New York City to attend a soiree at Epstein's infamous Manhattan mansion with none other than Woody Allen. Now, Epstein has previously called his get-togethers with Woody Allen in these Epstein files that have just dropped in his emails. He describes them as, quote, a pedophile convention, end quote. That's Epstein's own words for what goes on when he gets together with Woody Allen. So Chomsky, we can say, flew on the Lolita Express to attend what Epstein called a pedophile convention, which is extraordinary. And we know that Chomsky did meet Allen because, again, the Wall Street Journal asked him about this in 2023 when it was just kind of a rumor. And he described it as a night with a talented and beautiful artist, meaning Woody Allen, the guy who's got more skeletons in his closet than, you know, some, you know, 14th century church or whatever. Chomsky, as I said, in the emails, he also talks about his wish to visit Little St. James Island. He's in his emails to Epstein, he multiple times talks about, and I'm quoting again, dreaming of that Caribbean island, end quote, that he wants to go to. Epstein offered to fly the Lolita Express to Boston to allow Chomsky and his wife to get on board and have a holiday with each other. So it's almost as bad as it can possibly be, except that the only saving grace here is that there's no mention of girls or women or any sort of sexual exploits here.
So we just have about 5 minutes left, and I know that Noam Chomsky has obviously been incapacitated. He's been he can't speak because of a stroke in 2023, and so he can't really explain himself, I guess you could say. But there were already rumors about his Epstein connections before he died. Can you talk about that? Because we actually reported on that at Mint Press. And so a lot of this stuff is not even necessarily new, because Mint Press has been covering this for years. Even Chomsky's relationship with Epstein, we have been covering that for years now. But the DOJ release has obviously provided us with more intricate details that we can now confirm and vindicate more of our reporting. But what were some of these rumors about his relationship with Epstein before Epstein died?
Well, there was a picture that came out of Noam Chomsky arm in arm with Epstein's butler in Paris, which seemed very odd indeed. And we now know from the emails that Chomsky and his wife did indeed stay at Epstein's mansion in Paris. And that picture was indeed real, and that Epstein's butler took him around Paris to have a wonderful day out. I'll give you one more example. We reported at Mint Press in 2020 that Chomsky was asked about Epstein's relationship with MIT, which was his former university. Now, at the time, a lot of people didn't realize that Chomsky had this close personal relationship with Epstein, and they were just asking because Epstein was intimately involved in the world of science, giving lots of money to these universities. And the Dunk Tank podcast asked Chomsky about Epstein's relationship with MIT and whether it was appropriate. And he bristled with indignation and said, um, he said that, well, first of all, there are far worse people walking around MIT giving them money than Epstein. And when he was asked by the Wall Street Journal what is his relationship with Epstein, again, this was one of the very last public statements he ever made. He just said, it's none of your business, or frankly, anyone's. Epstein ultimately was actually intimately involved in Noam's businesses. As I said at the start, Noam wanted to he wanted to appoint Epstein's right-hand man, Richard Kahn, his accountant, to the Chomsky Family Trust, something which caused uproar among his children and ended up with their estrangement. Epstein in the emails, the reason we know about this is because he was forwarding all these personal emails about his personal financial matters with his children over to Epstein, and Epstein was reading them and suggesting steps all along the way. And one of the last emails Epstein ever sent to Noam was talking about how he should cut them out of their will. And then at one point he says, I'm so glad you've decided to leave your estates to your wife rather than your children. So yeah, it's a bitter pill to swallow. And I would compare this, Noam Chomsky's relationship with Epstein, to how another person on the left, another person, a vociferous critic of imperialism, someone who stood up for Palestinian rights, Norman Finkelstein, another academic in the eastern side of the US, just compare how Chomsky related to Epstein with him. In 2015, Finkelstein was invited by email to get in touch with Epstein. And instead of glad handing with him, he sent Epstein a message via email talking about how the disgusting things that he's done with 15-year-old girls mean that he should be put to death for his heinous crimes, and then never spoke to him again. That's really a principled stand. And that's the sort of basic moral decency that we would hope for from intellectuals that we look up to. We got it with Finkelstein, but unfortunately we didn't get it with Chomsky, and that is why the world of sort of leftist academia, anti-imperialist circles have been so shook by what's happened.
Yeah, and I mean, Epstein just sounds like a very charming person. The fact that he was able to get into like every corner and space within the Western establishment is so disturbing. And I mean, from academia to big tech to these political spaces and meetings, it really makes you question what exactly it is that we know about the ruling class. Because I mean, from this is just my own assessment, it seems like a very controlled release of files. I mean, why now? These are questions we still have yet to answer in upcoming conversations, but why now? Why would the DOJ release such damning information about the current sitting president, the state of Israel, and this pedophilia ring? It's almost like they're flaunting in front of us like who they are. They're showing us exactly who they are. And we're still not outraged enough to take action against these horrific crimes. But that's for another conversation. We're going to be joined by Greg Stoker, and we can talk more about the reaction of the public. Alan MacLeod, thank you so much.
Good to be with you.